It was supposed to be just another ordinary evening in Florida. A knock on the door, a pizza delivery, and then chaos. What happened next left a young, pregnant woman fighting for her life and an entire community grappling with a question no one could answer. Why? Who could do this to her? And how did it escalate to 14 brutal stab wounds? But here's the part that keeps haunting everyone who hears this story. What if it had been you? What if that knock on the door had come to your house? Today, we'll unravel the events that led to this unimaginable tragedy. We'll explore the mind of a man capable of such violence, the story of a young woman who had so much to live for, and the chilling moments that changed everything. Stay with me, because this is not just a story about one crime. It's about how fragile life can be, even in the most familiar of circumstances. The victim was Elizabeth, a young woman in her late 20s, living in a quiet neighborhood in Florida. She was 7 months pregnant, eagerly preparing for the arrival of her first child. Her friends described her as warm, kind-hearted, and full of life. She worked hard to create a safe and loving home, dreaming of the day she'd hold her baby in her arms. That evening was no different from any other. She had spent the day organizing baby clothes and preparing for the new chapter of her life. Like many of us, she decided to keep dinner simple, a quick call to her local pizza place for delivery. Think about it. How many times have you done the same thing? Ordered food, opened the door, and never thought twice about who might be on the other side? It's routine, right? But for her, that knock on the door wasn't routine. It was the beginning of a nightmare. Here's where it gets even more unsettling. This wasn't a dark alley or an abandoned street. This was her home, a place that should have been her sanctuary. Yet, it became the scene of an unthinkable act of violence. As we piece together the details of what happened next, I want you to imagine her life, her joy, her plans, and ask yourself, how could it all go so wrong? Who could do this, and why? Was there any warning sign that someone was capable of such horror? Welcome to True Crime Stories videos. I welcome you, my viewers and most especially my subscribers, for your support as we keep improving and bringing you daily told and untold true crime stories. Please don't forget to subscribe to this channel. It started like any other delivery, the knock on the door, the faint shuffle of footsteps as Elizabeth, 7 months pregnant, approached to answer it. She had no reason to feel uneasy. After all, she had ordered the pizza, and the man standing on the other side of the door held the box in his hands. But in the span of seconds, everything changed. The man forced his way inside. He didn't speak. There was no argument, no warning. He pulled out a knife, and Elizabeth, caught completely off guard, had no time to react. What followed was pure, unrelenting violence. He struck her again and again, the blade cutting deep with every blow. 14 times he plunged the knife into her body. Think about that for a moment. 14 stab wounds. And yet, Elizabeth fought. Despite her injuries, despite the terror, she fought, not just for her life, but for the life of the child she carried. Imagine the strength it must have taken. Imagine the pain. But here's the chilling part. This wasn't a quick escape for the attacker. He lingered. As Elizabeth lay bleeding, struggling for breath, he began rifling through her belongings. A purse, a few loose items on the counter. He seemed to be searching for something, though what exactly, no one can say for sure. And then, in a move that stunned investigators later, he left. Just like that. No hurry, no panic. He walked out of the apartment and disappeared into the night. But what the attacker didn't realize was that someone had seen everything. A neighbor, glancing out of their window, noticed the man leaving the apartment. They didn't know exactly what had happened, but something about the scene felt off, enough to make them call 911. When emergency responders arrived, they found Elizabeth barely clinging to life. Her injuries were catastrophic, and her unborn child had already suffered from the attack. Paramedics worked quickly, rushing her to the hospital, but the damage was too severe. Neither Elizabeth nor her baby survived. As investigators stood in the quiet of her apartment that night, piecing together the horror of what had just occurred, they were struck by one overwhelming question. Why? Why had this man targeted Elizabeth? What had she done to deserve such an unprovoked and brutal attack? The answers wouldn't come easily. But what police discovered in the days that followed would shed light on the attacker's identity and reveal a dark and disturbing truth. Who was this man? Was he simply a delivery worker who snapped, or was there something more calculated behind his actions? Investigators would soon uncover the clues he left behind, and the picture they painted was even more disturbing than anyone could have imagined. As the sun rose the next morning, the quiet Florida neighborhood was still reeling. Police tape surrounded Elizabeth's apartment, and detectives were already deep into their work. The question on everyone's mind: who was the man responsible for such a brutal and senseless attack? The first clue came from the 911 caller. The neighbor who had seen the attacker leaving the apartment described him as a man in his late 20s to early 30s, wearing what looked like a pizza delivery uniform. It was a small detail, but it gave investigators a starting point. Inside the apartment, crime scene investigators meticulously combed through the evidence. They found fingerprints on the pizza box, smudges on the doorframe, and a partial footprint near the front door. Each piece was carefully documented, photographed, and sent to the lab for analysis. But here's where the case took its first surprising turn. When detectives reached out to the pizza restaurant Elizabeth had ordered from, they discovered that no delivery had been scheduled for her address that evening. Think about that for a moment. Someone had deliberately posed as a delivery driver to gain access to her home. It was a chilling realization. Meanwhile, investigators turned to the hospital staff, hoping Elizabeth might have said something in her final moments. But she hadn't been able to speak. The only thing they had was the neighbor's description and the evidence left behind at the scene. Now, let's talk about the key players in this case. Detective Maria Lopez, a seasoned investigator with over 15 years of experience, was assigned to lead the case. Known for her sharp instincts and relentless pursuit of justice, Lopez wasted no time assembling her team. She brought in forensic analyst Kevin Hayes to process the physical evidence, and Officer James Carter was tasked with canvassing the neighborhood for additional witnesses. Together, they worked tirelessly, following every lead, no matter how small. But the challenges were mounting. Was this a random act of violence? If so, why Elizabeth? Why her home? Nothing seemed out of place in her life. No threats, no enemies, no reason to suspect she was in danger. Detectives began to question whether the attack had been targeted. Did the attacker know Elizabeth personally? Or had he been watching her, waiting for the right moment to strike? Theories began to take shape, but each one seemed to lead to more questions than answers. One of the first breakthroughs came when police obtained security footage from a camera located near the entrance to the apartment complex. The grainy video showed a man in a pizza delivery uniform entering the building around the time of the attack. It wasn't much, but it was something. Detective Lopez knew they needed to move fast. The man in the video was their best lead, but without a clear image of his face or a name to go on, they were racing against time. Then came the phone call that changed everything. A local pawnshop owner had seen news reports about the attack and called in a tip. The man in the pizza uniform had come into the shop just days earlier, trying to sell a gold bracelet engraved with the initials E.L., Elizabeth's initials. Detectives raced to the pawnshop, hoping this would be the break they needed. The shop owner provided them with security footage and a copy of the man's ID. Finally, they had a name. He was 29 years old, with a history of petty crimes, but nothing violent. So why had he escalated to murder? And why Elizabeth? As police delved into his past, they discovered a pattern that raised even more questions. This wasn't the first time he had used a delivery disguise to enter someone's home. But in those previous cases, no one had been hurt. Until now. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to come together. But one question remained. What had pushed this man to commit such a horrific act? The answer would come from an unexpected source, and it would leave everyone involved in the case stunned. Elizabeth wasn't just a name in a police report. She was a vibrant, caring woman who had so much to look forward to. At just 27 years old, she was expecting her first child, a baby girl she and her fiancé had already named Ava. Elizabeth had always dreamed of being a mother. Her friends would often joke that she had a natural talent for nurturing, always the one to offer a listening ear or lend a helping hand. Her smile could light up a room, and her laugh was infectious. Her family described her as the glue that held them together. She was the one who organized Sunday dinners, remembered everyone's birthdays, and made sure no one ever felt left out. Her mother, Patricia, tearfully recalled the day Elizabeth announced her pregnancy. "She was glowing," Patricia said, clutching a framed photo of Elizabeth. She couldn't stop smiling, talking about all the little things, what she would name the baby, the colours she wanted for the nursery, even what kind of school she hoped Ava would attend one day. Now, that future was stolen, leaving only questions and grief in its place. What makes this even harder to comprehend is the sheer brutality of the act. How could someone take the life of a woman who was so full of love and promise? And what about Ava, an unborn child who never had the chance to take her first breath? Elizabeth's fiancé, Michael, was inconsolable. Through tears, he shared the moment he realized something was wrong. "I was running late that night," he said. "I was supposed to be home earlier, but work kept me. I keep thinking, if I had been there, would it have made a difference?" Michael's voice broke as he described finding the hospital, arriving just in time to say goodbye. "I told her I loved her. I told her I was sorry, but she was already slipping away." It wasn't just Elizabeth's family that felt the loss. Her friends, her neighbours, even the local community. Everyone was shaken by the senselessness of it all. Memorials began to spring up outside her apartment, with candles and flowers lining the sidewalk. A small teddy bear sat among the tributes, a heartbreaking reminder of the life that was lost before it even began. Elizabeth's best friend, Sarah, summed up what so many were feeling. She was the kind of person you don't forget. She made everyone around her better. And now we're left trying to figure out how to move forward without her. "This happen?" one neighbour demanded, her voice trembling with anger. "How does someone get away with walking into a woman's home and doing this?" These are the questions that haunt us. They linger long after the crime scene tape comes down and the cameras stop rolling. Because this wasn't just a crime. It was a betrayal of everything we hold sacred. Elizabeth trusted the world around her. She opened her door to someone she thought was just doing their job, and that trust was shattered in the most horrifying way possible. Now, the community demanded answers. Justice wasn't just a desire, it was a necessity. Because for Elizabeth, for Ava, and for everyone who loved them, the story couldn't end here. And so, we're left to ask, how do we honour a life so brutally cut short? How do we make sense of something so incomprehensible? For Elizabeth and Ava, the answers lie in the pursuit of justice, a justice that feels both too late and absolutely essential. The prosecution, led by District Attorney Sarah Collins, wasted no time presenting their case. "What we have here," Sarah began in her opening statement, "is an unprovoked, calculated act of violence that robbed Elizabeth Rowe and her unborn daughter Ava of their futures. The evidence you will see proves beyond any doubt that Marcus James is responsible. The first piece of evidence brought to light was the fingerprints. Forensic expert Kevin Hayes detailed how Marcus's prints were found on the pizza box and the doorknob of Elizabeth's apartment. These prints, he explained, place Marcus at the scene of the crime at the exact time of the attack. Next came the surveillance footage from a local pawnshop. The jury watched intently as grainy footage showed Marcus entering the shop just hours after the attack, attempting to sell Elizabeth's gold bracelet. Prosecutors argued that this was proof of his callousness, showing how quickly he sought to profit from his crime. But the most damning evidence came from the neighbor, Linda Martinez, who testified with a trembling voice about what she witnessed on that fateful night. "I saw him leaving the apartment," Linda said, her voice cracking. "His shirt was covered in blood. At first I froze. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. But then I called 911. The defense, led by attorney Richard Lawson, sought to create doubt. They argued that the evidence was circumstantial and suggested that Marcus had been framed by someone else who wanted him out of the picture. They questioned Linda's reliability, pointing out inconsistencies in her initial statement. "Is it possible," Richard asked the jury, "that fear and confusion clouded her memory?" However, the defense struggled to counter the weight of the evidence, particularly when the prosecution revealed Marcus's confession. During a late-night interrogation with lead detective Emily Carter, Marcus had broken down, admitting to the crime. "I didn't mean for it to happen like that," Marcus said in the recorded video, played for the jury. "I panicked." While Marcus later recanted this confession, claiming it was coerced, the damage to his defense was irreparable. When the jury finally retired to deliberate, the tension in the courtroom was palpable. Elizabeth's mother, Patricia Rowe, held tightly to her husband's hand, while Elizabeth's fiancé, Michael Sanders, sat silently, staring straight ahead. After just 3 hours, the jury returned. The courtroom fell silent as the foreperson rose to read the verdict. "We, the jury, find the defendant, Marcus James, guilty on all charges." There was an audible gasp, followed by muffled sobs from Elizabeth's family. Michael bowed his head, tears streaming down his face as Patricia clung to her husband. Judge Rebecca Turner addressed Marcus directly during sentencing. "Your actions on that night were inhumane and incomprehensible," she said. "You took not just one life, but two, an innocent mother and her unborn child. For this, you will spend the rest of your life in prison, without the possibility of parole." Outside the courthouse, a crowd had gathered, many holding candles and photographs of Elizabeth. Reporters captured the raw emotions of the day as family and friends spoke about the outcome. Patricia, clutching a framed photo of Elizabeth, addressed the crowd. "Elizabeth was our light," she said, her voice breaking. "She was kind, full of love, and so excited to be a mother. We will never get her back, but today we got a measure of justice." Michael also spoke, though his words were heavy with grief. "I'll never stop missing her," he said, "but I'll carry her and Ava in my heart forever. They deserved so much more." The trial may have ended, but the pain of losing Elizabeth and Ava will never fade. The Rowe family will always feel the absence of their beloved daughter, and the Clearwater community will forever remember the young woman who should have had her whole life ahead of her. Elizabeth's story is a heartbreaking reminder of the fragility of life and the importance of justice. While Marcus James will spend the rest of his days behind bars, the memory of Elizabeth and Ava lives on, a legacy of love and resilience in the face of unimaginable tragedy. As we reflect on this case, we are left with a question that lingers. How can we ensure the safety of our loved ones in a world that sometimes feels so uncertain? Even with the conviction of Marcus James and the verdict that brought some semblance of closure to Elizabeth Rowe's family, one question continues to echo in the minds of many. Could this tragedy have been prevented? Let's take a moment to think about what we know. Marcus had no prior connection to Elizabeth, or at least none that investigators could uncover. Was this really a random act of violence, or is there more to the story that remains buried? What about the warning signs? The aggression Marcus displayed during the attack, was this truly the first time his violent tendencies emerged? Was there something in his past, perhaps overlooked, that might have hinted at the danger he posed? Elizabeth's loved ones have wondered endlessly. Why her? Was it a cruel twist of fate, or was there a darker motive that has yet to surface? Despite hours of interrogation, Marcus never revealed what drove him to commit such a brutal act. And then there's the most haunting question of all. What would have happened if someone had intervened sooner? Could Elizabeth and her unborn daughter Ava have been saved? It's a question her fiancé, Michael, and her parents will carry with them forever. Shift tone slightly, inviting interaction. But what about you? What do you think? Does this case feel as though all the pieces have been put together? Or does something still feel off? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Do you believe justice was truly served, or does this case leave you with more questions than answers? And let's not forget the community of Clearwater, Florida. In the wake of this tragedy, neighbors began to ask themselves difficult questions. How safe are we really in our own homes? Could this happen to someone we love? The Rowe family has turned their grief into a mission, advocating for stronger measures to protect women and vulnerable members of society. Their resilience is inspiring, but it also serves as a stark reminder of the price they paid to spark change. Yet, even with the Rowe family's efforts and Marcus James behind bars, one lingering mystery remains. What snapped inside Marcus that night? What could possibly compel a person to target a defenseless pregnant woman in such a horrific way? Some questions, it seems, may never be answered. But maybe you hold a piece of the puzzle. Could something in this case have gone unnoticed? Have you seen patterns in similar stories that might explain what happened here? Share your thoughts, because sometimes it's the smallest observation that leads to the biggest breakthroughs. Elizabeth's story is one of heartbreak and loss, but it's also a story of love, resilience, and a community coming together in the face of tragedy. The memories of Elizabeth and her daughter Ava live on, not just in the hearts of her family, but in the determination of those who fight to make the world a safer place for everyone. If this story moved you, share it. Let Elizabeth's story remind us all of the importance of vigilance, compassion, and justice. And don't forget to subscribe to this channel for more stories that delve deep into the questions that haunt us all.